Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is a pair of red wiggler bins that were just recently buddied up to be managed at the same time. For quite some time they were being managed independently, but when they had reached the age of 120 and 60 days of age, we decided it was time to pair them up. Despite the 60-day gap in their ages, it still seemed like a good idea, and it actually has been pretty interesting to be able to have a bin that's almost 2 months older being fed side by side with a bin, just to be able to observe the differences in those 60 days of difference in their ages. So over here we also did a little bit of a test with this piece of paper on top. This piece of paper was put out here to see if the worms would take to it or not. And the only reason that was in question was because this piece of paper had been used to line a container into which fried foods were being placed, and the paper was kind of soaked with oil, making me question whether the worms would be interested in it or not. And it almost does seem to me like a piece of paper like this, sitting there right below the plastic where the moisture is recirculating, would get a lot of action. But I see as if, I don't know, to me it just seems like none of it's been broken down. But I'm also seeing something curious, because I keep turning it over and I see no worms on it, but I believe that worms have actually made their way in between the two layers. It's a 2-ply piece of paper towel, and it did seem like it was had managed at one point to grab one of the plies so that perhaps we can separate them gently from one another and see what's happening between the plies. So even though the worms haven't started nibbling on it, they've gone ahead and they've turned it into their own little private hiding spot by crawling in between the 2 plies of paper. How unusual. Well, I wasn't really expecting to see that, and I don't know if that just happens anyway all the time when you're using 2-ply paper towels in the worm bins. But to me that was a little bit interesting. I believe I could still smell the scent of the fried foods that were placed on the paper to let them drip any excess moisture onto the paper. And I'm really curious now whether or not this paper is going to get any action due to the fact that it was soaked with oil when I first placed it in here. I guess I'd like to put it back at the end, just to let the test continue. Maybe 10 days wasn't enough time for the material to get to the point where the worms would start nibbling on it. I guess we could even try to increase the appeal of it, just in case there is something about the oil that they don't like, or it might not even be preference that they don't like it. Maybe there's just something about it that they're incapable of ingesting. So my idea was just to get the worms off this stuff long enough that we can get in here and apply today's feeding, and then come back with these now 2 separate pieces of paper, now that we've separated the 2 plies, and return it. And maybe this time we'll coat the paper with some worm chow, which we know almost always results in the worms nibbling it up and eating it. And if they don't respond to the paper being coated with worm chow, then I would have to guess that perhaps they're not going to touch this stuff due to the fact that it's got the oil on there. But I am willing to let the test continue for one more interval between feedings. And now it'll sort of, it'll get changed up a little bit with some worm chow sprinkled onto it. Alright, so I've set those aside, and we'll be sure to drape them out here across the top one more time. Now, besides the age difference, we can also observe other differences here, such as the amount of worm traffic happening out here on the top surface due to the fact that there was plastic coverings and moisture recirculating beneath the plastic covering. Here, on the other hand, things are quite dry, and you could totally tell just from the appearance of these feeding zone indicators. So let's remove these. These feeding zone indicators are going to get replaced today because some of what they're getting is more coffee, as well as the coffee filters, and then the foods that they're getting are going to be a nice variety of yummy, I don't know, just an assortment of different types of veggie peels and scraps of this and that, as well as a few chunks of cantaloupe melon. And I've got my prepared bedding over on the side, so let's see, we'll start over here in the older of the two bins. 143 days of age and 83 days of age is where we stand with these, and the 60 days difference does become apparent, or at least has in the past, unless I guess appearance-wise, maybe the younger bin is actually starting to catch up at this point. After we paired these up to be buddy bins, we, deliberately left the coverings the way we had found them, where this one was thought to be best off with paper only coverings, this one with plastic. But we have talked about harmonizing the coverings if it became sensible to consider doing so. So I'm always looking for that potential opportunity to, either do away with the plastic on the younger bin, perhaps because it's not needed there any longer, or even in the case of the older bin, if it's thought that, replacing the paper only with plastic would benefit it, because maybe we don't want to see any further drying occur, then maybe we would do that. I'm starting to wonder if that might be a possibility over here. Because the stuff out on the surface, I scraped off all the drier material and piled it up over here near me. But you don't have to go down too deep to get into stuff that's really nice, but it is kind of borderline, I don't know if I would really want to see it get much drier. There are worms in it, so they're not put off by its moisture content, fortunately. But I am questioning whether it might not be necessary to continue with the high airflow solution here. Maybe we would be better off with allowing the system to retain what moisture content it has presently and not allowing any more to be lost to evaporation. So I've got my prepared bedding here on standby. It looks just like this stuff here, shredded paper and cardboard. But if we've got so much of it still remaining from the last check-in, as well as other materials from the last check-in, I'm even observing some of the banana peel, I believe, was part of the last check-in. Still holding up pretty good. Quite a bit of it remains. And these large things that look like they might be paper strips are actually the peel of the potato. Usually the worms will nibble off the soft part of the potato that's on the peel and leave the rest. But even here is a chunk that just didn't even really get nibbled away at all. It still has like that firmness by having the potato on it still. Most of it was nibbled away because when you put it in frozen, it just softens up after it thaws out. But for whatever odd reason, that one chunk just, I guess, didn't get eaten. So I'm just contemplating how to play this as far as bedding goes. I've got the old coffee filters, the old feeding zone indicators, which we could use. So it's not like we're going to go in here with no bedding for them. But whether we need to add any more fresh bedding today, it might not be necessary. Here's another chunk of potato that's not been consumed yet because it's still kind of firm. I wonder if maybe I had put this stuff into the freezer for too short a period of time, so only those bits that actually did get frozen and thawed subsequently were the ones that the worms were able to nibble away, and other pieces not. This last piece, though, was interesting, because part of it is still got the potato on it, and the other part has been nibbled clean. Kind of makes me wonder why that is. So, I mean, between the potato leftovers and the banana peel not being completely consumed yet, it does make me question whether coming back after only 10 days might have been a little bit too soon in here. I'm not going to worry too much about it. I think we'll just go ahead and give them the nice generous portion of food that we allocated for them today. They'll slowly finish off what they've been given previously in previous feedings, and then they'll be able to just work their way over to the newer stuff afterwards. So we've opened up a pretty good sized hole over here in the older of the two systems. Why don't we get ourselves caught up over here in the newer system? I mean, I usually try to edit the video in such a way that any sort of interruptions or whatever get removed, and hopefully don't even get noticed along the way. But I did at one point stop the filming to take a phone call, and then I also, for whatever reason, had the camera just unexpectedly stop on me twice now so far. And it didn't happen in the past couple minutes. It happened a little while ago. Kind of making me I don't know, almost wonder if it's going to happen to me again. Is it going to shut off again on me here, or is it going to just continue going? I'm using a borrowed camera, and I do remember turning off the voice command functions, so I don't think it's turning on and off due to voice commands. I know it's got a full battery and it's plugged in, so it shouldn't be turning off due to power issues. So kind of makes me wonder why the camera's behaving the way it is. So I'm a little bit distracted. Apologies for that. That's all the more reason, I think, for me to just try to get this feeding wrapped up and let these little guys get back to work. And just from touching the material in both systems, definitely a lot more moisture throughout the whole system in here. Almost making me wonder if we can just swap, you know, put the plastic on here and actually come on here with the paper and allow this stuff to possibly air out a little bit, because it is slightly clumpy. Not clumpy to the point where I would have concerns about it, but it does almost seem like if we were to simply swap the two coverings, then maybe maybe it would be to the benefit of both systems. So I'm just thinking out loud here. As far as bedding in here, though, a lot of leftover bedding, possibly because of the lower moisture content of this system, but here bedding's going away pretty quickly. So what I'm going to do is I am going to supplement the bedding over here in the younger of the two systems with a little bit of my prepared bedding. And since I do have some napkins and paper towels that I'd also like to compost, we're going to put them in here too. And then we've also got the old feeding zone indicators, but I'm going to kind of leave it at that. And then we'll let's put one of the halves of this larger napkin in here, and then paper towel here, paper towel there, and then I think we'll kind of be in balance here. And I'm even now questioning where to put that test object, the oily paper. I think the best bet will be to follow the plastic covering and allow the oily paper to stay with the plastic and be positioned right below the plastic where the moisture is recirculating. And that, I think, will ensure a good amount of traffic to it, which is really what we want to see when we're operating a test object in the worm bins. We definitely want to see worm traffic around it. and on it. So this looks like a pretty nice assortment of different types of fragments of veggies, this and that, and fruit bits with the melon on the bottom. And then on top of that, we're going to come in with the coffee. But you know what, before we put the coffee in, I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of this pulverized eggshell right onto the veggies to help with the consumption of that stuff. And oh, let's not forget, we've got a whole bunch of leftover stuff here. These bits of potato, these old corn cobs, this even this banana peel just seems like it could have gone a lot quicker if there was more moisture in the surrounding material. More potato peels. And I think I'm going to start making it a habit to start busting open the corn cobs as we encounter them and see if we can help with their breakdown a little bit. Because I've got even more in the freezer that we can include in future feedings, but if there's always leftover corn cob, it always seems like, well, do we really want to add more? Perhaps if we start breaking the stuff up a bit, we'll aid the breakdown process. So here you can already see I was busting up some corn cob bits into smaller pieces so that the overall surface area of that food object is larger and provides worms with more surface area to be able to approach that stuff and consume it for us. So I think we're almost at that point where we can finish off the application of food by dropping in the coffee. The coffee I'll typically apply into my worm bins in conjunction with a little bit of my worm chow, which I've also got right here on the side. So let's do that too. And that is a pretty good size feeding, but with the leftovers and with the amount of food we just gave them, I'm thinking 10-day interval between feedings, we might want to increase that. So maybe wait a little bit longer between now and the next check-in just to make sure they've got time to get caught up with the consumption of the foods. Yeah, you know, I mean, I really do like it when the material is really crumbly and flows this way, but it does seem to me like moisture in here could be higher. It almost even seems to me like the worms are a little bit small, possibly because they're slightly dehydrated. If there was more moisture in the system, I believe that the worms would be a little bit larger in size. So we might be actually observing signs of a bin that is possibly on the brink of getting a little bit too dry for the liking of the worms. And we don't want to have that happen. We want to have the worms comfortable and productive, working down the stuff that we gave them. I think that the leftovers we found were also kind of a clue that tells us maybe the system would benefit from not seeing any more drying happening. So, you know, I think we are going to do what we talked about. We're going to, after we place the feeding zone indicator, we're going to come over here with the plastic covering now. But before we do that, let's not forget, we want to continue on with this interesting test of the oily top covering paper towel to see whether or not the worms eventually do begin to nibble this stuff away, or are they simply going to leave it there and not bother with it. We've taken away that little hiding spot in between the two ply layers, so they're not going to be able to crawl in between two layers anymore. They'll only be able to nibble on it at this point, if they're going to do so at all. But if they continue to ignore that paper, I think that'll tell us that perhaps stuff that's got oil on it is not really going to go anywhere in the worm bin. Yeah, look at that. Things seem perhaps a little bit almost muddy, but not muddy. I don't know. It's not fair to say that this stuff is muddy because it all seems to crumble and break free of itself pretty readily, and I like it that way. Here's another corn cob. Let's help it along by just cracking it in half and dropping it down there with the rest of the foods. But it does seem like seeing it get any more damp than this would be completely unnecessary and possibly could lead to sticky, muddy, clumpy conditions, which we definitely don't want to see happen. And we'll be able to avoid that from happening by putting the paper coverings onto this system right here. So I don't know, I'm curious to see if people agree with what I'm rambling on about here. Hopefully it makes sense. It seems to make sense to me in the moment. So hopefully you agree. Now, naturally, sort of like what we saw over here, by paper being the only covering on here, the stuff out here on the surface is going to get a little bit dry and slightly neglected. But that's to be expected. But I think the benefit will be that the material in the bin is not going to continue getting wet. It'll have a chance to air out a little bit, get a little bit more crumbly, but we're not going to let it get as crumbly as what we see over here. So I'm tempted now just to see if we can treat one of the pieces of paper with some worm chow, and maybe just with the combination of the worm chow it'll get eaten, and maybe without the worm chow maybe it'll continue to get ignored. I'll be curious to see what we get when we come back in here. So let's get things covered back up. The plastic will come back on onto the system. That seems like it doesn't need any additional drying. We'll get to see what happens with that paper when we get back in here. Maybe they'll eat it all, maybe they'll only eat the stuff with the worm chow on it. We'll have to see. And here, I guess we'll get a chance to see if with only paper-based coverings, whether the material will get a little bit less clumpy, a little bit less muddy, and possibly just a little bit more crumbly and flowing, which is the way I like it. So I think we're almost done here. I just want to get some of this stuff off my glove rather than take it to the sink and rinse it away. But that's it for the video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.